This is an NBC News special report.
And we have more new developments in the region this morning. U.S. officials tell NBC News that recent attacks by Iranian-backed militias have injured at least 45 Americans on bases in Iraq and Syria.
Their pace increasing with 10 attacks just since Thursday, bringing the total number to at least 38 attacks since October 17th.
For more, we're joined by NBC News Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kube. Courtney, good morning. So what else are you hearing from U.S. officials about these attacks? And what can you tell us about those injured Americans?
So fortunately, the majority of these attacks have been unsuccessful in that they have not caused injuries, damage to infrastructure, or deaths of any Americans. But there have been, as you mentioned now, at least 45 U.S. service members who've suffered minor injuries. Now, the reason that number jumped so much since about this time last week is because of the number of service members who've come forward with potential traumatic brain injury. That is something, it's an ailment that has a very wide range of symptoms from pretty mild to extremely severe. And it's something that doctors will have to monitor these people for months, if not longer, to see whether they actually have traumatic brain injury or TBI. But that's why the number is now up to 45. But what we also learned yesterday, Savannah, is that there have now been 4 attacks, not just the 2 we were aware of, but 4 that have led to U.S. injuries. Now, these 38 minimum now of 38 attacks, because the reality is we hear about more every few hours. They have been carried out for the most part by one-way attack drones. There have been some mortars, some indirect fire. But for the most part, most of those munitions, whether it's a drone or a rocket or a mortar, most of them have not reached the bases, or they've been shot down by the base defense system, Savannah.
So, Courtney, I mean, we talked to you just over a week ago about attacks on bases in Iraq and Syria. Since then, there have been at least 15 more attacks. How is the U.S. responding?
Yeah, so we saw that one series of airstrikes that the U.S. conducted about 10 days ago now in northeastern Syria. They hit some ammunition weapons depots or facilities. We haven't seen any response since then, although U.S. officials do say that they reserve the right to continue these sorts of what they call retaliatory strikes. The goal with these sorts of airstrikes is to cut off the flow of supplies so that these groups can't carry out more attacks against bases with Americans on them. Now, I will say, in the past, back in March, actually, of this year, the U.S. carried out a series of strikes when there were attacks like these, and it was successful. We went for months, frankly, from March until October 17th, with really no attacks against bases with Americans there. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of those sorts of strikes. Again, the goal is to deter. But it's important to point out that the U.S. is also doing this in what they see as a proportional manner. So they're striking facilities as opposed to people, Joe and Savannah.
And Courtney, as we mentioned, U.S. officials believe these attacks are linked to Iran. What does that tell us about how or why these attacks are being carried out?
Yeah, that's right. So those facilities that they hit a week and a half or so ago now, officials were telling us at the time that they had direct links to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's the group who is believed to be supplying, equipping, training, and funding, in many cases, some of these militia groups in Iraq and Syria that are carrying out these attacks. And in fact, the U.S., while they're not saying that they have any intelligence or evidence that Iran sort of greenlit this uptick in attacks, they are calling on the Iranian regime, Iranian leaders, to tell these militia groups to stop, which of course indicates that the U.S. believe that Iran has some sort of sway or power over these groups to make them start or stop these sorts of attacks. Officials, though, continue to say that there is no direct link between this uptick in attacks, now 38 of them in the last several weeks. They're saying there's no uptick in these attacks and direct link to Israel and Gaza. But the reality, guys, is this is not happening in a vacuum. We had not seen these sorts of attacks on bases in months. They ticked up on October 17th after the war in Israel and Gaza started, after the October 7th attacks. The reality is here, there has to be a link between the two.